Okay, shall we proceed?
Liz, you're muted.
I think she wants to be for the moment. She's
Okay.
talking to
fine.
some other people,
All right.
some other person.
And yeah, hi Liz, welcome from Italy.
Hello. Guess where I went today?
Where?
I went inside of St. Peter's and I saw maybe 10, 20 people tops
Wow.
inside. Yeah, it was so empty. So if you follow me on Facebook, I will be posting a photo or a video of it. So
Great.
anyway.
Yeah, I saw your photo on there yesterday. That's great.
Well, I live all of 20 minute walk, maybe 15-minute walk from there. So it's kind of like, it's what I should be doing while I'm here.
Great.
I know I'm really bad at that, but enjoying the moment. Here we go.
And so political unrest seems to follow you, Elizabeth.
Don't tell me. Please.
Well, you're the Prime Minister of Italy just resigned.
Yes, and I follow him actually, and I thought that he had some really good initiatives going, and so I'm really hoping that this is just a COVID thing, that people are reacting and are in a different mindset because of that. But I have always, throughout all of this, I've been a supporter of his the initiatives and stuff that he's been doing, because frankly, you have to do something.
Yeah.
Anything's better than nothing, and our numbers have been getting better, and people are getting back to work too. So anyway, that's all for another day.
Yeah. Well, Italy dissolves and reforms the government every 15 minutes anyway.
This is so true. It's absolutely true.
All right, we're at number 124. Nowadays, a firm belief in the common destination of the earth's good requires that this principle also be applied to nations, their territories, and their resources. Seen from the standpoint not only of the legitimacy of private property and the rights of its citizens, but also of the first principle of the common destination of goods, we can then say that each country also belongs to the foreigner, inasmuch as a territory's goods must not be denied to a needy person coming from elsewhere. As the bishops of the United States have taught, there are fundamental rights that precede any society because they flow from the
Dignity.
Your screen must have frozen.
Yeah.
Steve is frozen.
dignity granted to each person as.
That's weird.
Okay.
No, Pastor Steve, are you there?
Hyper.
I'm here.
I was hyper.
Okay.
Frozen in time.
Yeah, my internet connection's been doing wonky things the last couple days.
You know, you might turn off your background if you wanted to save some bandwidth.
Mary's not hogging your bandwidth, is she?
No, Mary's not even online right now, so I don't know what's going on. Okay, let's see if this works any better. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. I may have to reboot the router. Well, I'm not going to interrupt all y'all for that. Somebody else maybe should just read and we'll take it from there. Did you all read the paragraph?
Did.
Yeah, I have a question though, if I could. I don't understand the concept when he says the first principle of the common destination of goods. Can somebody help me out with that?
Seen from the standpoint of Common destination of good.
What do you think it means? I don't understand your question.
I think
I
it's an
don't
interesting
understand what he's
question.
saying. What's the first principle of the common destination of goods? So what principle is he talking about? And what does he mean by common destination of goods?
I'm looking at the footnote.
Maybe we're the common destination, like the user is the ability to use those things. So the first principle is that everybody gets to use the goods, or that everybody has access to, or everybody has the same amount of goods.
Phil, the last sentence of 123, I think is what introduces that, or at least addresses that. It's the principle of subordination of all private property to the universal destination of the earth's goods. So just like Liz was saying there, it's the concept that all of the earth's goods are to be used by everyone.
I think for me, excuse me, for me, it would maybe make more sense than to say the first principle of the common use of goods.
Well, the Wikipedia says this: the universal destination of goods is a concept in Catholic theology by which the Catholic Church professes that the goods of creation are destined for humankind as a whole, but also recognizes the individual right to private property. In addition, political authority has the right and duty to regulate the legitimate exercise of the right to ownership for the sake of the common good. So I think we're talking about a specific doctrine here.
Yeah, I think you're right. Good. That's a good catch, Bob. Thank you. Yeah, I hadn't thought that it would be a doctrine for the Catholic Church. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for taking that.
But let's talk about that doctrine for a second, because it sounds to me like, from what Bob read, like what it's saying is that the doctrine is saying, really, the goods of the earth, the goods of creation, really belong to all people. And yes, we recognize the right of private ownership, but we also recognize the right of government to regulate that right of private ownership and redirect it when necessary, so that
It's kind of the, what is it when you have two concepts that are diametric, that are opposed to one another?
Conflict.
Yeah.
Mutually exclusive?
I think conflict, I mean, just on the surface, those two concepts seem to be in conflict with one another.
I think it's a very socialistic statement.
I don't think so, Margie. I would disagree with you on that.
Okay.
And like you think of the common good would be water, air, tillable soil, just things that come into my mind. Those are for the common good, as opposed to property ownership.
I looked ahead at the footnote, and the footnote said that this comment was delivered by the bishops. It's the pastoral letter against racism, open wide our hearts, the enduring call to love. And so it was a conference of the Catholic bishops in the United States. And I'm wondering if that particular group of individuals would have a different perspective or a different feeling of common good. But if that's a Catholic doctrine, then I guess not.
Wikipedia goes on to say that in the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, 177 says, Christian tradition has never recognized the right to private property as absolute and untouchable. There you go, Margie. On the contrary, it has always understood this right with a broader context of the right to all to use the goods of the of creation. The right to private property is subordinated to the right to common use, to the fact that goods are meant for everyone. The principle of the universal destination of goods is an affirmation both of God's full and perennial lordship over every reality and of the requirement that the goods of creation remain ever destined to the development of the whole person and of all humanity. This principle is not opposed to the right to private property, but indicates the need to regulate it. Private property, in fact, regardless of the concrete forms of regulations and judicial norms relative to it, is in essence only an instrument for respecting the principle of the universal destination of goods. In the final analysis, it is not an end, but a means. There's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah,
There sure is.
Yes.
It seems like if that's a principle of the Catholic Church, I know I mentioned this before, but what they mean by private property, like Phil was saying, it seems like they're talking only about like the earth's resources, because the church absolutely owns
Right.
tons of property and things. They don't feel those belong to everybody. So I don't really fully understand that if that's not what that means.
It could also be a cultural thing. We're looking at and reading this from our point of view, where private property is, like the common phrase is 9/10 of possession is 9/10 of the law. But maybe in a different society, private property wouldn't be so important, or maybe in a different society, property would be held as a common good as opposed to an individual right. I mean, we may be looking at this paragraph from our cultural point of view, which is very different from how other cultures may look at it or read it.
So Pastor is logged off and is logging back on.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if he's.
I can see him there now, but
Yeah.
he's not speaking. Oh, he just froze again.
Okay, I think I'm back.
There he is.
The first sentence in 125 offers somewhat of an explanation to what we were saying.
Pastor, I don't know if you might want to try logging on with your cell phone using a cell tower rather than your home internet.
Oh, she's gone again.
Can I read paragraph 125 while we're waiting?
Sure.
So this presupposes a different way of understanding relations and exchanges between countries. If every human being possesses an inalienable dignity, if all people are my brothers and sisters, and if the world truly belongs to everyone, then it matters little whether my neighbor was born in my country or elsewhere. My own country also shares responsibility for his or her development, although it can fulfill that responsibility in a variety of ways. It can offer a generous welcome to those in urgent need or work to improve living conditions in their native lands by refusing to exploit those countries or to drain them of natural resources, backing corrupt systems that hinder the dignified development of their people. What applies to nations is true also for different regions within a country, since there too great inequities often exist. At times, the inability to recognize equal human dignity leads the more developed regions in some countries to think that they can jettison the dead weight of poorer regions and so increase their level of consumption.
Wow, that made me think of healthcare. You know, the concept that if we give equal access to everybody, that means we have to wait too long and we don't get to have it when we want it. And so that would be the concept of jettisoning the dead weight so that you can increase your own level of consumption.
But it kind of surfaces the issue to me of you know, how much do you share?
That's a good question, Bob.
Yeah.
That's
a good
what's always
question.
been in the back of my mind here. And
How much should you give?
yeah.
Well, and that's always a factor when we realize that, you know, many of us, we could give all we have and it still wouldn't create equity. So it's like you're saying, Bob, how do you decide what we're really called to?
And the other thing, I mean, if especially as a nation, if we share everything all at once, then ongoing there's nothing left. Whereas, and my wife and I have this discussion every so often. We own a duplex, and so anyway, the duplex throws off. And I've had it. It was the first house I ever bought, so you can imagine. My basis in it is nothing. But anyway, but it throws off some income. But it's also worth, you know, a fair amount of money. So the question is, do I sell it? And then there's no more income, and of course I can invest the proceeds, or do I stick with the income? And that's kind of what a little, you know, that I can see going. That is one of the considerations for me, and in what we can do for other countries. But I think he makes a good point about, you know, basically raping the natural resources of and backing corrupt systems. That's what really bothers me, quite frankly, about Mexico right now with this, you know, we catch one of their senior military people involved in the drug trade and then arrest him, only having to give him back to Mexico. And then Mexico turns around and says, we're not going to prosecute him. It's like, sorry.
Where are we?
125, Pastor.
Okay, thank you.
So I have just a comment, I guess, that I think about once in a while, especially in the springtime when we get butterflies, because I know that monarch butterflies go to a certain spot in Mexico, and they come to the trees there in order to rest and relaxation. I don't know how to say it. Anyway, they congregate in these trees. And there's kind of an ongoing war there between the people that want to save the trees in order to preserve the butterflies and the people that want to lumber the trees, cut the trees down in order to provide resources. And it kind of in a microcosm of what I think we all kind of deal with is, do we need the lumber so desperately that we're going to cut down a habitat for a species? And then you have the cultural conflict between the people that want to keep it intact and those that want to use the resources. And it just points out for me how difficult it is to make these decisions sometimes, and how difficult it is to come to kind of how to balance one need against another, especially when you're providing for other people and other people's needs. Do you put the need of the person above, or the people above the habitat?
Yeah.
Good stewardship.
There are some other great examples of exactly that, Phil. Down in the Amazon basin, of course, there are all kinds of medicinal plants that grow that they're just beginning to discover the uses for. But there's also really valuable hardwoods in there. And of course, it can be converted into really great grazing land. And there's all kinds of mineral wealth in there. So there are a lot of people that want to go in there and drill for oil, a lot of people that want to go in and do mining, a lot of people that want to go in, clear the land for cattle grazing. And of course, it destroys the rainforest, and it destroys the home of indigenous peoples that are disappearing from the earth, whole cultures that we've never even known about. And the same thing is happening in the Congo. There's mineral wealth there in rare earths that we need for our computers and our cell phones and our electronics that aren't found anywhere else. People want to go in there and mine those things, but it destroys the habitat to do it. You know, on the one hand, it creates wealth in an area where there isn't any, but then it destroys the habitat, and it also brings political instability, because the people with the money to go in and do the mining make deals with the political powers and ignore the people on the ground and just displace them without getting permission or their cooperation or their buy-in or anything. So yeah, these are problems that we have not figured out good solutions to.
Bob, I want to go back to your comment about how much is enough. 'Cause I think that's important. And Karen and I have this conversation as well. How much are we called to do outside of ourselves to help others? And how much, how can I say this? How much do we extend ourselves to help others? Do we give so what I'm driving at is, how do you achieve a balance in that? Because neither one of us are in, are monks or nuns. And so, you know, we don't live in a communal situation, and we have internal conflicts as to, have we done enough? Sometimes, and I will confess that there are times when I take solace that we've done what we think we need to do. It may be very little, but we hope that other people are doing a little bit as well. so that by a combination of all of us doing a little bit, we are doing a lot in common.
I just, I'm sorry, I find it almost funny that you two are asking yourselves that question.
Yeah, right.
Because you two are the
Spend some time with us. It won't be so funny.
you two are the ones who are loading up your car all the time to take things to Fe Esperanza, and
Yeah.
you two are the ones who are taking the gift cards there and making sure that people are getting fed. And I mean, you two are extending yourselves more than anybody I know, except maybe for Sandy and Jeffrey.
Mhm.
I mean, and you know, and everyone in this group is good about extending themselves to help those who come to hand, and going beyond those who come to hand. And frankly, if the people in this world would simply help those who do come to hand, those who they do encounter, that would be enough. That would be enough. You are the ones who go out of your way to find those who aren't being helped. So it kind of tickles me a little and warms my heart in a big way that you ask yourselves those questions. But
we still ask the questions.
And maybe therein lies, and maybe therein lies part of the answer, is that those people who are sensitive to the issue are probably doing enough.
Mm.
Yeah.
But yeah. But it's the right question.
yeah.
Well, one thing that, and if I may kind of go on a tangent here. When I was in college, I spent a summer in Kenya. And we were finishing our work, and the last things that needed to be done in building the school was that we needed to have a really big pile of rocks moved from one location to another. And the people in our group looked at each other and went, okay, this is going to be a big job. But what the village did is they got all of their children in a row and they lined them up, and they told each child to pick up a rock and move it from one location to the other. And some of the rocks were small and some of the rocks were large, but in a very short period of time, all those rocks were easily moved from one location to another. And going back to what I said previously, it's an image that I keep in my mind, I guess, when Karen and I are talking about whether we could do more, thinking that even doing a little bit moves one rock from one pile, one location to another, and if everybody picked up one rock, how much more could we get done?
That's a great story.
That's a wonderful story, Phil.
Thank you.
Many hands make light work.
Yes.
Don't be surprised if you hear that in a sermon sometime.
Oh, that story's copyrighted, by the way. No, it's not.
Oh, dear.
I think we still go back to this tension between private holdings and common good.
But even as a homeowner, even though we've got private property, there's still such things as in your title as riparian rights, drilling rights. You can only go so far. I mean, there's still that overlay of the common good, even with private property, in the United States, and I'm sure in other countries as well. that the common good and the resources for all, in many ways, are protected.
Hmm.
We just think we have complete control of our private property. We don't. And then there's also that thing where the government can come in and take the property if they need to build a freeway or a school or
Eminent domain.
eminent domain, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years old. No, I must have been, yeah, about that age. I was just mystified because there was a pasture we owned that was fairly close to our farm in Kansas. This is after my grandfather had died. So my parents and my aunt and uncle now owned the farm. And the government came and told us they were going to take the pasture by eminent domain because it wasn't far from the Naval Air Base. Go figure, a Naval Air Base in Kansas. But it wasn't far from the air base, and they were going to use it for a bombing range. Yeah.
Well, that'll upset the milking schedule.
Well, you know, they gotta practice. They gotta practice somewhere, I guess. But I was just mystified by the idea that the government could just come and take the property. And of course, they paid a nickel on the dollar for it, but that was the other thing. They paid what they wanted to pay. There was no negotiating. They said, here, we're taking it. Here's this amount of money that we decided you're getting for it. And I remember asking my dad all kinds of questions about it. I also remember my dad being really mad about it. Because,
Yeah.
you know, once they'd used it for that purpose, it was not going to ever be suitable for grazing ever again or for farming ever again. It was just going to have to lie there fallow and be kind of useless because it would have metal scrap all over it and everything else. And there's just no way to properly clear it. Anyway, it just always struck me as weird that the government could come and just decide, we want this property, and boom, there it is. And then another
indigenous peoples, right? The government came in and took from the Native Americans, you know, just took it all. And, you know, if they were compensated in any way, it certainly wasn't just. So, I mean, I think that's been the kind of the policy of our nation since its inception, but it's sad, I agree.
Yeah, manifest destiny.
But and if you want to get into the common good, I mean, another taking was on in San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake. They set a bonfire, or they set a backfire along Van Ness Street, going towards the existing fire, and that's what finally stopped the San Francisco fire. Those people got zero compensation.
Oh,
Wow.
And that's why there's no Victorians west of Van Ness.
Wow. Huh.
A little bit better story though is down here. If you're ever driving along Ocean Boulevard out on the peninsula area of Long Beach, you'll notice that there are some funny looking houses sitting on the beach, just kind of like by themselves with, you know, wide spaces in between. And anyway, I guess back, I believe in the 30s, maybe 40s, that was all, there were houses all along there, and the city came in and condemned all that property for beach access. In the 60s. And I guess it was the 60s, I'm being told. And the ones that are still standing, those are the people that fought it.
oh,
And successfully so. Kind of successfully so, but I guess they got to keep the property, but and I think what happened is the price got up so high that the city decided not to do anything about it. But they can only improve. They can't raise the property and rebuild. They can only remodel. And so that's why they're kind of funky looking little shack type things.
Those are the two that are like on the west end of the peninsula there before it hits the bay shore.
Yes.
I've often wondered about those two old houses and why
Yep.
they're there or how they got there. Thank you.
Ain't history wonderful?
More about eminent domain you ever wanted to know.
Oh.
Okay, where are we?
126.
Okay.
Phil, do you want to continue?
No, I'd rather break it up and have somebody else read 126 if that's okay.
I'll do it.
Okay, Marty.
We are really speaking about a new network of international relations, since there is no way to resolve the serious problems of our world if we continue to think only in terms of mutual assistance between individuals and small groups. Nor should we forget that inequity affects not only individuals, but entire countries. It compels us to consider an ethics of international relations. Indeed, justice requires recognizing and respecting not only the rights of individuals, but also social rights and the rights of people, plural. This means finding a way to ensure the fundamental right of peoples to subsistence and progress, a right which at times severely restricted by the pressure created by foreign debt. In many instances, debt repayment not only fails to promote development, but gravely limits and conditions it. While respecting the principle that all legitimately acquired debt must be repaid, the way in which many poor countries fulfill this obligation should not end up compromising their very existence and growth.
Forgiveness.
Certainly, all this calls for an alternative way of thinking. Without an attempt to enter into that way of thinking, what I am saying here will sound wildly unrealistic. On the other hand, if we accept the great principle that there are rights born of our inalienable human dignity, we can rise to the challenge of envisaging a new humanity. We can aspire to a world that provides land, housing, and work for all. This is the true path of peace, not the senseless and myopic strategy of sowing fear and mistrust in the face of outside threats. For a real and lasting peace only will be possible on the basis and shared responsibility in the whole human family.
Basis of a global ethic of solidarity.
Based
Well,
global ethic of solidarity. Okay.
Sandy, I can hardly hear you. Can you turn up your volume a little bit?
step
Just
all the
one
way.
sentence and then
You just have to get closer.
I think she just pointed out that you dropped a sentence on the at the end of that paragraph.
For a real and lasting peace will only be possible on the basis of a global ethic of solidarity and cooperation in the service of a future shaped by interdependence and shared responsibility in the whole human family.
There we
I
go.
did, and I apologize for that.
Oh, wow. What a nice dream. A global ethic of shared responsibility and interdependence. A global ethic of solidarity and cooperation. We can't even get that into a national ethic of solidarity and cooperation.
right.
But the use of the word subsistence in 126, I thought was interesting. If we could, you know, if internationally we could agree that that the nations globally need to provide for the subsistence of people, that could be a floor. in our help.
Yeah, that's a pretty low bar.
Yeah. But isn't that kind of what Alaska does?
Yeah, I think
For
so.
their native peoples. I mean, because when I've been up there, I know they've talked about, you know, the subsistence living and so on.
Well, it's not unlike Norway that gives their people delivers income every single year if you're a citizen, because of the oil, and I don't know if it's oil and salmon or something like that. But Alaska does that too, don't they? They give their, if you've been a citizen of Alaska, or you know, for so long, don't they get some sort of?
I think Alaska does have
They get a stipend.
Yeah.
Stipend, that's what it is.
I think Norway does that also.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they do.
I can't resist mentioning that I'm reading this first principles slowly, as you might imagine, because I've been talking about it now for months probably. But anyway, it talked about, what it does is that how were the authors of the Constitution of Independence affected by classical writings, you know, like Romans and Plato, Socrates. And anyway, Montesquieu surfaces as a large influence on these people. And one of his tenets is that you cannot have a large democracy. And because what happens is the democracy over time pulls power to itself and usurps that power from the people. And I find it kind of interesting that that's exactly what the United Kingdom is talking about, is that one of the failures of the United Kingdom is the inability to kind of enforce financial terms among its members. And so it's, you know, there's a feeling that they should acquire more power. Just interesting to see how this stuff might, you know, somebody predicted it and it still plays out. And so, I mean, the United States have been doing remarkably well for being as large as it is and being able to keep the peace. So, enough said.
I'm still having problems with private property and common good. I'm having a really hard time reconciling the two. So if I own, this is a really simplistic concept, but I'll put it out there. If I own property, we own property, and don't laugh when I say this. I own property, but we recycle our trash. Is that an example of working for the common destination, the principle of common destination, of working for a common good if you do that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's so 60s.
Well, I think
Conservation of the Earth's resources, definitely. Right?
I think it's also another example might be that when we're in a situation of drought and we have water rationing for the common good, we maintain and support that kind of rationing and sensibility on which day of the week we water and how much water we actually use. And I think that's an example of being a property owner, but being sensitive to the common good, so that everyone has enough water.
That's a good example. Yeah, let's say you own a huge piece of property in the Central Valley. Maybe you decide not to grow cotton because cotton is a water-intensive crop. Even though you know cotton's going to grow well there and you'll make a huge profit with cotton, but cotton takes an enormous amount of water, and water is scarce in the Central Valley. And it's a common resource there that all your neighbors also need. So maybe you choose to grow something that doesn't need so much water. Maybe you go with jojoba or, I don't know, hemp. You know, there are other choices. Just that you start thinking about it in terms of what's going to be the better way to think about this with my neighbors.
And Pastor, I think you might have just touched on something, because one of the things that I heard Phil kind of saying was, who decides what's the common good? And, or at least that's a question that pops up in my mind. And I'm thinking that what you just said was what the common good may be defined in terms of your neighbors.
I'm sorry, say that last part again, Bob.
And the common good may be defined in terms of your common neighbors.
Yeah. And then the Pope is saying we need to ask ourselves that question globally. Yes, ask it locally, but also ask it globally. So I don't know, well, the example that keeps popping into my head here is the Colorado River.
Good one.
I mean, here it is.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major water source for several states here in the United States, but it also is a source of water for Mexico.
Yeah.
And by the time it trickles into Mexico, there's almost nothing left of it.
Yeah.
Because we've sucked all the water out of it.
Yeah.
And our attitude has always been kind of a, oh, well, too bad.
Frequently.
We're doing the same thing with the Rio Grande. And yeah, it's
It's interesting because it raises the consideration of geographical constraints. You know, I mean, it's like if we considered, because of the geography of our continent, we considered this land south of us to be an extension of us rather than a separate, you know, entity.
I think if we really did consider it to be an extension of us, we would treat it better.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Margie, do you want to read on?
Sure. Chapter 4, a heart open to the whole world. If the conviction that all human beings are brothers and sisters is not to remain an abstract idea, but to find concrete embodiment, then numerous related issues emerge, forcing us to see things in a new light and to develop new responses. Borders and their limits. Complex challenges arise when our neighbor happens to be an immigrant. Ideally, unnecessary migration ought to be avoided. This entails creating in countries of origin the conditions needed for a dignified life and integral development. Yet substantial progress is made in achieving this goal. Until that progress is made, we are obliged to respect the right of all individuals to find a place that meets their basic needs and those of their families. where they can find personal fulfillment. Our response to the arrival of migrating persons can be summarized by 4 words: welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. 4, it is not a case of implementing welfare programs from the top down, but rather undertaking a journey together through these 4 actions in order to build cities and countries that, while preserving their respective cultural and religious identity, are open to differences and know how to promote them in the spirit of human frailty.
Fraternity.
Fraternity.
Sorry.
Let's pause there for a second. Margie, I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Ideally, unnecessary migration ought to be avoided. This entails creating in countries of origin the conditions needed for a dignified life and integral development. You came from Canada.
Yes.
Did you not have the necessary conditions needed for a dignified life and integral development in Canada?
Did. We were poor, but I had a home and hearth and food and clothing. My dad had work, but for some reason, they were born in the States. So for some reason they wanted to come back. And at my young age, well, I was 13, and they'd probably been planning this for several years, and they did not include me in their planning. So I don't really know what the original motivation to move down here was.
Okay. It strikes me that you would have an unusual perspective on this.
Yes.
Um,
Don't know. I wish I did, but I don't.
Warmth could have been one issue.
Sorry?
Warmth. Heat
Yes.
could have been
Warmth.
one issue.
Yeah. No kidding. When we left, it was 12 above. When the week after we left, we checked the temperature and it was -5
oh boy.
Wow.
in February. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Our response to the arrival of migrating persons can be summarized by 4 words: welcome, protect, promote, and integrate.
Okay, we did.
Welcome, protect, promote, and integrate.
How many countries do not do that? Too many.
Yep. I wish that were our policy.
I wish that were everybody's policy.
Well, I think people don't stop and think about what it takes to make people leave their home country and seek a new life somewhere else. That it's not something most migrants are doing because they want to see a new country. They do it because they're trying to escape a life that's just too painful to keep enduring.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But that's difficult. A lot of places where it's not because of the conditions, like, for Americans to move to Canada or Americans to move to Australia, for example, that's frequently not legally doable. So those, when you say that, I wish that as a world we would have that attitude, but I'm not sure in practicality how that's done.
That's not a case of us leaving here. That's a case of not getting in there.
Right, that's what I mean. You can't,
Okay.
it's not an option for us. Just if we prefer it, it doesn't really matter why we would be leaving here. We're not allowed.
Okay.
Our small group did a study on immigration, and one of the things I was impressed with is for those people, I don't think it applies to the asylum group, but for those people that are actually immigrating, there's a lot of support that the government gives to those people in terms of it's settling them and following up on them and so on. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's not like they aren't doing something.
One of my sons-in-law is from Czechoslovakia, and he and his parent, he was 9, so he didn't know all of it, but Leo would share with Don, Lou's father would share with Don a lot of why they came over. And one, of course, was the communistic invasion. And one was that Leo and his wife were well educated. Leo had a doctorate, Mrs. Vera had a master's degree, but their 2 children would not be allowed to go to university under the communistic plan.
Wow.
Only every other generation would be well educated. And they knew their children were bright enough to do good things. So they planned for probably a year on how to get out of the country with whatever means they could. So they left because of oppression, literally.
You know, though, I wonder sometimes in terms of integrating immigrants into our country. I remember this was before I went to seminary. We lived, there was a couple that lived a couple doors down from us who were immigrants from Russia. And they worked at Memorial Hospital. They were, she was working as a nurse's aide, and he was working in maintenance and as a janitor. And in the Soviet Union, which is where they had come from, they had been doctors. He had been a radiologist, and she had been an OBGYN.
Wow.
And I said, well, why aren't you working as doctors here? And they said, well, we have to pass the licensing boards. And before they'll let us take the licensing boards, they want us to take several university courses because they don't trust our education.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Why don't they just let you take the licensing boards so they can test your education? Why are they assuming right off the bat that you? And they said, we don't know. That's just what they're requiring. And so they had to go through this obstacle course of several years before they could get back to practicing in their chosen professions, that they're well trained for. And so here they were working. I mean, these are highly professional, well-educated, intelligent people that could have been put to work in a field where they were much needed. But they were being made to jump through these hoops.
One of the hoops that the Lavicheks had to jump through was learning English. And they went from Czech Republic through Austria and over. They ended up in Canada because they had to learn some English. And Leo, with a doctorate in economics, worked in a foundry in Montreal.
Wow.
And so for several months until they both learned enough English. They were probably there maybe a year or 2. I don't remember that much, but until they could converse fairly easily. Then there was a group of Czech expatriates here in Glendale that sponsored them into this country. So there's several hoops, if you don't speak English or American, that you have to go through.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Well, and this cross licensing issue is still going on.
Yes, it is.
I think nurses have a national board, but it seems to me pharmacy that started has still had some holdouts as late as 4 or 5 years ago.
At City, we had one nursing student who was from Russia. She spoke very good English, and but she had trouble. Like in Russia, they had one plan of attack for something, and here ours was seemingly the opposite. And she had to relearn that kind of stuff. And she said, as she said it, I studied my brains out for the licensing exam. She passed. And there were several of my colleagues that weren't too impressed with her. But the day she passed, she came in and sought me out And I said, come on, we're going to go make a big announcement. And there was a bunch of the other teachers in the conference room. And I said, you all remember her. She has an announcement to make. And she just stood up and said, I passed. I was proud of her. But she
For
did work
her.
hard. She did work hard. I don't know if that was an internal bias on the part of my colleagues that she was from Russia, or whether they just didn't think she had the smarts to make it or what, but she did.
Right.
Well, this has been fun. I apologize for my internet problems earlier on, but I seem to have them fixed. We'll start with number 130 next week, and I'll see you all Sunday. I'll include the information about Barbara's graveside service in the e-blast. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a blessed day, everybody.
You too.
You too, Margie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.